Welcome. Today, David and Goliath, the fight. It was never intended that David should fight in the battle against the Philistines when Goliath emerged as the champion of the Philistines. David was supposed to be looking after his family's sheep miles away at Bethlehem. But the battle had been delayed for so long while Israel's men searched for someone to fight Goliath that after a month his father, David's father Jesse, sent Jesse with more supplies to his three oldest brothers who were in the army of Saul. And so it was that David came and saw Goliath and saw how frightened Israel's men were because of this giant of a man who was there opposing them. And they expected that a man from Israel would agree to fight Goliath, and that fight would begin the battle between the two armies. Now when David saw how Goliath was speaking against the armies of Israel, he was angry. He said, "Who is this uncircumcised Philistine that he should defy the armies of the living God?" And the report of David's bold words even reached the king. And that's the section that we're going to be looking at today. It's the first book of Samuel, 1 Samuel chapter 17 and verses 31 to 58. My name is Keith Simons. I'm a Bible teacher from England, presenting these talks how you can understand the King James Version of the Bible, looking each time at a different section, usually a whole chapter, verse by verse and word by word. But today we're looking just at the second half of the first book of Samuel, chapter 17, and beginning at verse 31, which reads, "And when the words were heard which David spake, they rehearsed them before Saul, and he sent for him." So David's words were repeated to King Saul, and that was what caused Saul to send for this young man, probably just a teenager, David. Saul wanted to see this young man who was speaking so boldly against the champion of the Philistines. The English words maybe don't quite give us the emphasis that is there in the Hebrew, where it says that the people rehearsed David's words before Saul. That word rehearsed means that they told Saul about David's words. They declared emphatically what David was saying to Saul. And then when it says that Saul sent for David, it really means that when it says that Saul sent for David, it really means that Saul, in the literal Hebrew, took David, seized him, grabbed hold of him, you might say. This was a matter of great importance to Saul. Maybe at last a champion had been found who could fight against Goliath, and whose victory against Goliath would lead to the defeat of the Philistine army. So David comes before Saul, and David is just this young man or teenager, and Saul is this powerful, impressive king, this huge man who is head and shoulders above everyone else. And big Saul looks at little David, and David, verse 13, said to Saul, "Let no man's heart fail because of him. Thy servant will go and fight with this Philistine." Let no man's heart fail. The word heart there really means courage. Don't let anyone's courage to fail. People shouldn't lose heart. They shouldn't lose courage because of Goliath. Why? Because thy servant, David means himself, as a citizen of Israel. The citizens of Israel were servants of their king, King Saul. So David calls himself humbly, thy servant. Thy servant will go and fight with this Philistine. And verse 33, David hears from Saul the obvious problem. And Saul said to David, thou art not able to fight against this to go against this Philistine, to fight with him, for thou art but a youth. Saul's word there could mean just a boy, and he a man of war from his youth. Since he was young, he's been a fighter in armies. Since he was young, he's been battling wars, and you've no experience. You're only a young man, a boy, a youth. How can you go against someone so large and strong with so much experience? And David replies, I've had experience. I've had experience of defeating enemies who are stronger than me, because I've been a shepherd. Since I was a young boy, I've learnt to look after sheep. And in Israel, in those days, in the forests, there were many wild animals, and they were ferocious animals. Verse 34, and David said unto Saul, thy servant, David means himself, kept his father's sheep. And there came a lion and a bear, and took a lamb out of the flock. David is not saying here that a lion and a bear attacked at the same time as each other. He's saying that at different times there came a lion on one occasion and a bear on another occasion. Fierce animals. Lions could kill a man, and sometimes do in the Bible. And these animals came, and they came after David's sheep. They took a lamb out of the flock. And David adds, verse 35, and I went after him, and smote him, and delivered it out of his mouth. I rescued that lamb, though it was in the mouth of the lion, or in the mouth of the bear. I fought for the freedom of that lamb, and I achieved it. And when he, the lion or the bear, arose against me, I caught him by his beard, and smote him, and slew him. I caught him by his beard. Do lions have beards? Do bears have beards? The description probably here is a word picture for the sort of fight. We could call it a hand-to-hand fight, except this is with a wild animal. If it were with a person, then he would have a beard to seize. If it were with a person, then it would be a hand-to-hand fight. But David had to get into a fight like that with a lion and with a bear. I caught him by his beard and smote him and slew him. I defeated him. I killed that lion. I killed that bear. And how did I do that? The same way in which I intend to defeat Goliath. Verse 36, thy servant, David means himself, slew both the lion and the bear, and this uncircumcised Philistine shall be as one of them. Why? Seeing he hath defied the armies of the living God. Oh, this is a statement of faith in God. Goliath's words are not just against Saul's army, against Israel's army. No, his words were against the armies of the living God. Saul was leading Israel's army, the army of God upon earth. We call the Lord the Lord of hosts. Hosts means armies, the armies of heaven, the angels in heaven, but also Israel's armies that go at God's command. David says, Goliath has defied the armies of the living God. Therefore, trusting God, David will fight them. He calls Goliath an uncircumcised Philistine. He's referring to circumcision, the covenant that God made with Abraham. And this Philistine is not part of that covenant. And now he's opposing God's armies. Now David makes his great statement of faith. Faith is belief and trust in God, and he shows that that belief and trust in God directed his actions in the past and will direct his actions against Goliath. Verse 37, David said, moreover, in addition, that means, the Lord that delivered me out of the paw of the lion and out of the paw of the bear, he will deliver me out of the hand of this Philistine. I'm trusting God in this situation. I know that this enemy is stronger than me, but I've fought against enemies which are stronger than me before. I trusted God to rescue me when the lion attacked and when the bear attacked. I'm trusting God to look after me when Goliath fights against me. Now Saul, King Saul, he doesn't really understand faith. He doesn't understand trusting God. But what he does understand is fierce words. And he listens to David's words of faith, and he can see that they are fierce words, that they are confident words, that they are powerful words. He can also see they're religious words. And Saul said unto David, Go, and the Lord be with thee. Why is Saul saying that? Well, he's impressed by David's speech. He's impressed, and he feels that someone who can give a speech like that can indeed fight against this Philistine enemy and defeat him. And why does he say, the Lord be with thee? Because David has spoken about the Lord. And so Saul replies with his religious words, the Lord be with thee, a blessing upon David, a prayer for David as he goes out to the battle. But Saul doesn't really understand faith in God. He thinks that if David is going to fight this battle, he's going to have to be well protected. So verse 38, he sets about trying to defend David in this fight. And Saul has armour. Not many people in Israel will have had armour. We read in an earlier battle that it was only Saul and his son Jonathan who had proper weapons in it. The rest of Israel's army were fighting with agricultural implements, with the knives and other tools that they used in their daily work. But Saul is a king, and as a king he's been able to get some quite impressive clothing to protect him in battle. Verse 38, and Saul armed David with his armour, and he put an helmet of brass upon his head. Also he armed him with coat of mail. Saul armed David with his armour. That word for armour really means, we think, the underclothing, which is worn underneath the armour, and it's clothing which is designed so that the plates of the armour, which are called the mail, later on in the verse, the coat of mail, can be attached to it. So he puts on this underclothing and then he fixes in place the pieces of this armour. And David puts on this king's armour. He even puts a helmet of brass upon his head. You wonder how a king ever came to wear a metal crown. It does seem an odd sort of hat for a king to wear, but it's derived from the practice of wearing a helmet when you go into war. This was a king's helmet. Here is David going into war, but he's wearing the clothes that a king goes into war. He's even wearing the helmet, the predecessor of a crown, which a king wears. This is one of a series of occasions when we glimpse David as a king long before he actually becomes a king. It's as if it's a sort of prophecy as to what David will one day be. And notice how it's Saul, the king himself, who arranges for David to be dressed like that. But no, it's all a mistake, because Saul is trying to fight the enemy via David in a very human way. He thinks that with a great sword and a helmet and with armour, then David has a chance against Goliath. Saul is not trusting God at all, and although David goes along with this, he agrees to try it, he soon finds he can't fight Goliath like that. Verse 39, and David girded his sword upon his armour. To gird means to tie around. He tied a belt, Saul's belt. David didn't have a sword. David was just a young man who was looking after sheep. No, David girds Saul's sword upon his armour, and he essayed to go. In other words, he started to go. He tried to go. He didn't go very far. He essayed to go, for he had not proved it. He'd not tested it. He wasn't used to all this heavy metal around his body. He was a shepherd who wore simple, lightweight clothes, whose tools, whose weapons were the simplest things he could manage. And David, he's strong, but carrying all this heavy metal around him, he realizes he loses the one advantage he naturally has against Goliath, which is that David, as a young man, can run quickly. End of verse 39. And David said unto Saul, I cannot go with these, for I have not proved them. I've not tested them. I'm not used to them. How can I take these things into battle? And David put them off him. He took them off. So now he's got to choose his weapons for his fight. And they are the weapons that a shepherd would choose. Verse 40, and he took his staff in his hand, his stick, and chose him 5 smooth stones out of the brook, the wadi, the dried up riverbed that separated the two armies. From it he chooses 5 smooth stones, and put them in a shepherd's bag which he had, even in a scrip. A scrip means a wallet or a pouch or a pocket. He organises his clothes so that he's got a bit of a pocket in which he can carry these 5 stones. And his sling was in his hand, and he drew near to the Philistine. A sling. I've been watching videos on YouTube to get the feel of what David's sling was like as a weapon. And the simplest sort of sling is really just 2 long cords, pieces of rope or strings, which are folded double, and at the point where they're folded double, they're tied together so that a stone can go in that place. And the way the man fights with them is he takes the sling when he's got his stone in it, and a smooth stone is what was recommended in the video, and he swings it round and round so that it's moving at tremendous speed, and then when he moves it into the throwing position, bowling it round, he releases it, and the stone flies out faster and with more force than he could throw a stone just in his hand. That is the weapon that David is using. That is how David will fight Goliath. Verse 41, and the Philistine came on and drew near unto David. So Goliath has seen his enemy, and he approaches David slowly because he's got all this heavy armour on. And the man that bare the shield went before him. So to defend Goliath from attack, from anyone firing an arrow, a man is holding a shield in front of him. And then Goliath looks to see his enemy. Verse 42, and when the Philistine looked about and saw David, he disdained him. He despised him. He thought that it was a stupid enemy, a weak enemy, for he was but a youth, and ruddy, and of a fair countenance. A youth, ruddy, with red skin, or it might be red hair. Ruddy, his face flushed from running, and of a fair countenance. A pretty young boy, an attractive young boy or young man. And Goliath is expecting to see someone fierce and powerful and impressive, and he sees a young man. He sees a boy, he thinks, come to fight against him. What sort of stupidity is this? Goliath thinks. I'm going to attack this youngster. Verse 43, and the Philistine said unto David, am I a dog, that thou comest to me with staves? A stave means a stick. David's shepherd's crook was a stick. A staff or a shepherd's rod. So David presumably has this tied against his body, ready for the battle. End of verse 43, and the Philistine cursed David by his gods. So in the name of his false gods, the Philistine Goliath declares the evil things that he's going to do to David. Verse 44, and the Philistine said to David, come to me, and I will give thy flesh unto the fowls of the air, and to the beasts of the field. The fowls, the birds of the air. There were vultures in Israel which attacked dead bodies and which would tear the flesh off dead bodies. And the beasts of the field, wild dogs that would come and tear apart any meat that they found. So Goliath, in the name of his false gods, threatens David with death. And David has even more fierce words to declare to the Philistine. Verse 45, then said David to the Philistine, thou comest to me with a sword and with a spear and with a shield, all these weapons of warfare. But I come to thee in the name of the Lord of hosts. Remember, hosts means armies. The Lord who leads heavens and armies, who is also the God of the armies of Israel, whom thou hast defied. O you spoke against Israel and its weakness, but you looked only at men, because there is a God who leads this army. It is the Lord, the creator of heaven and earth, and you have spoken against him this day. And so, verse 46, this day, says David, will the Lord deliver thee into mine hand. God will hand you over to me, and I will have power over you. The verse continues, and I will smite thee, and take thine head from thee. I'm going to kill you, and not just kill you, but cut off your head. And I will give the carcasses of the host of the Philistines this day unto the fowls of the air and to the wild beasts of the earth. You threatened that against me, David, but I declare that the Lord is going to give me power over the entire army of the Philistines, and I will hand them over to destruction. I will hand that whole enemy army over to death. And the fate that you have spoken against me, that the fowls of the air, the wild birds, and the wild beasts of the earth will eat my body. No, that is what is going to happen to the dead bodies of your army. And the testimony of this is going all round the world, that all the earth may know that there is a God in Israel. Yes, Israel's God is the true and living God, the God of all the earth, the God whom you have opposed. Verse 47, and all this assembly, all the people who've assembled here today from the two armies, shall know that the Lord saveth not with sword and spear. God doesn't depend on weapons to fight. The battle is the Lord's. God controls this battle, and he will give you is plural. It will be thee or thou if it were singular. It doesn't say he will give thee into our hands. It doesn't say that he will just give Goliath into Israel's hands. No, he will give you, the army of Philistia, into our hands for us to defeat that whole army. So they approach for the battle itself. Verse 48, and it came to pass when the Philistine rose and came and drew nigh to meet David. So Goliath arises, he goes forward, he drew nigh, he draws close to meet David. He's coming closer and closer, slowly because of his army, that David hasted. David ran. He ran toward the army to meet the Philistine. That is, he's running towards the enemy's army. He's running around this man with the shield who is protecting Goliath. Verse 49, and David put his hand in his bag and took thence a stone. Thence means from there. He took from the bag a stone and slung it. In other words, he used the sling to throw it, and smote the Philistine into his forehead. In his forehead, that the stone sunk into his forehead. So he takes this stone, he puts it in his sling, he swings it round and releases it, and it scores a direct hit. It hits the forehead of Goliath. Was the armour not protecting his forehead? Or is it low point in his forehead? Is it hitting him between the eyes or even through the eyes? But however it hit him, or maybe it broke through the armour, maybe it broke through Goliath's helmet, but the stone sunk into Goliath's forehead. And the result was that Goliath fell, and he didn't just fall backward as we might expect, he fell forward. He lost his balance with the sudden shock and the sudden stunning of it, and he fell upon his face to the earth. And that's a big shock, so suddenly to see a champion and a hero of such size falling so tremendously and with such power to the ground. Verse 50, so David prevailed over the Philistine with a sling and with a stone, and smote the Philistine, and slew him. But there was no sword in the hand of David. David defeated Goliath just with this simple weapon, of a couple of strings and a stone. That was enough to kill the giant who had defied Israel. But David had no sword, therefore, verse 51, David ran and stood upon the Philistine and took his sword and drew it out of the sheath thereof. The sheath was the protective thing in which a sword was held at your side, and slew him. You notice this thing of repeating, he slew him, he smote him, as if he's got to die many deaths. This is a word picture we see often used in the book of 1 Samuel to represent the death of a great man and a great death, that it's repeated over and over, the actions to kill him. Of course, it's appointed to man once to die, and Goliath only died once. But when you actually see someone dying in that situation, you're not sure, are you, that that person truly is dead? And David was making sure of it. So David takes the sword and slays Goliath with it and cuts off his head therewith, which must be difficult because a sword is not a saw. A sword is intended for stabbing, not cutting. And David, with his lack of experience with the sword, is using it to try and cut as you would with a knife, to cut through Goliath's neck. But the Philistine army don't need to see David finishing off Goliath, because, end of verse 51, and when the Philistines saw their champion was dead, they fled. They saw it. They started running away, and that leads to the battle. Verse 52, and the men of Israel and of Judah, the men under Saul's direction, arose and shouted and pursued the Philistines. They chased after them until thou come to the valley and to the gates of Ekron, one of the Philistine cities. And the wounded of the Philistines fell down by the way to Sha'araim, which is in Judah. It means twin gates. So they fell down along that road, even unto Gath, another Philistine city, and unto Ekron. So they're running away, they're trying to get to the safety of their own cities and within their city walls, and those who don't make it die on the route as Israel's men attack them. Verse 53, and the children of Israel, that is the army of Israel, returned from chasing after the Philistines, and they spoiled their tents. Spoiled there means that they plundered them. They went back to the tents that were in the abandoned camp of the Philistines, and they took everything that was valuable from there. Verse 54, and David took the head of the Philistine, the evidence that he was the man who defeated Goliath, and brought it to Jerusalem, but he put his armour in his tent. A bit of a mystery there as to what it means when he brought the head of Goliath to Jerusalem, because Jerusalem was not at that time under the control of Israel. There was a fortress there which was ruled by the Jebusites, but very near there some of Israel's people did live. So maybe that's where David took the head of Goliath, or maybe it was later when David conquered Jerusalem that the head of Goliath was finally taken there. But the armour David took, and it says he put it in his tent. All this valuable armour that Goliath had worn, it went to the tent of David. And some people have wondered, his own tent? David didn't come in a tent. Did he take a tent from the Philistines, or does it have another meaning? Could it mean it went not to David's tent, but to the Lord's tent, the Lord's tabernacle? Well, we know that's exactly where Goliath's sword went. 1 Samuel chapter 21 verse 9 tells us that it was there. And then the end of the account as Saul tries to work out what's happened. Verse 55, and when Saul saw David go forth against the Philistine, he said unto Abner, the captain of the host, that is the man who Saul had appointed over the army, the host of Israel, Abner, a great military leader. And Saul said to him, Abner, whose son is this youth? And Abner said, As thy soul liveth, O king, I cannot tell. As thy soul liveth, a serious promise, an oath. They're trying to work out what's happened here, how it is that this young man who they do not know has won this battle. And verse 56, and the king said, Inquire thou whose son the stripling is. A stripling means a young man. The Hebrew word suggests someone who has been hidden. Yes, David has been hidden from them. Yeah, I know, David, we read in the last chapter, was Saul's harpist. He played the harp and comforted Saul whenever the evil spirit from God troubled Saul. Yeah, but Saul only knew David as a musician. Now Saul needs to know who David really is, who this young man is who can win such a powerful battle. Verse 57, and as David returned from the slaughter of the Philistine, Abner took him and brought him before Saul with the head of the Philistine in his hand. This is the man, look, he's still carrying the head of Goliath. Verse 58, and Saul said to him, Whose son art thou, thou young man? And David answered, I am the son of thy servant Jesse, the Bethlehemite. Well, who we always knew David was, David, the son of Jesse. In a moment's time, I'm going to read you the whole of today's section, but first my email address, 333kjv@gmail.com. Please do write to me, tell me where in the world you are, if in America, which of the states. That's 333kjv@gmail.com. And now here's the whole of 1 Samuel, the first book of Samuel, chapter 17, verses 31 to 58, in the King James Version of the Bible. And when the words were heard which David spake, they rehearsed them before Saul, and he sent for him. And David said to Saul, Let no man's heart fail because of him. Thy servant will go and fight with this Philistine. And Saul said to David, Thou art not able to go against this Philistine to fight with him, for thou art but a youth, and he a man of war from his youth. And David said unto Saul, Thy servant kept his father's sheep, and there came a lion and a bear, and took a lamb out of the flock. And I went out after him, and smote him, and delivered it out of his mouth. And when he arose against me, I caught him by his beard, and smote him, and slew him. Thy servant slew both the lion and the bear, and this uncircumcised Philistine shall be as one of them, seeing he hath defied the armies of the living God. David said, moreover, The Lord that delivered me out of the paw of the lion, and out of the paw of the bear, he will deliver me out of the hand of this Philistine. And Saul said unto David, Go, and the Lord be with thee. And Saul armed David with his armour, and he put an helmet of brass upon his head. Also he armed him with a coat of mail. And David girded his sword upon his armour, and he assayed to go, for he had not proved it. And David said unto Saul, I cannot go with these, for I have not proved them. And David put them off him. And he took his staff in his hand, and chose him 5 smooth stones out of the brook, and put them in a shepherd's bag which he had, even in a scrip. And his sling was in his hand, and he drew near to the Philistine. And the Philistine came on, and drew near unto David, and the man that bare the sword, that bare the shield, went before him. And when the Philistine looked about, and saw David, he disdained him, for he was but a youth, and ruddy, and of a fair countenance. And the Philistine said unto David, Am I a dog, that thou comest to me with staves? And the Philistine cursed David by his gods. And the Philistine said to David, Come to me, and I will give thy flesh unto the fowls of the air, and to the beasts of the field. Then said David to the Philistine, Thou comest to me with a sword, and with a spear, and with a shield, but I come to thee in the name of the Lord of hosts, the God of the armies of Israel, whom thou hast defied. This day will the Lord deliver thee into mine hand, and I will smite thee, and take thine head from thee, and I will give the carcasses of the host of the Philistines this day unto the fowls of the air, and to the wild beasts of the earth, that all the earth may know that there is a God in Israel. And all this assembly shall know that the Lord saveth not with sword and with spear, for the battle is the Lord's, and he will give you into our hands. And it came to pass, when the Philistine arose and came and drew nigh to meet David, that David hasted and ran toward the army to meet the Philistine. And David put his hand in his bag, and took thence a stone, and slung it, and smote the Philistine in his forehead, that the stone sunk into his forehead, and he fell upon his face to the earth. So David prevailed over the Philistine with a sling and with a stone, and smote the Philistine and slew him. But there was no sword in the hand of David. Therefore David ran and stood upon the Philistine, and took his sword, and drew it out of the sheath thereof, and slew him, and cut off his head therewith. When the Philistines saw their champion was dead, they fled. And the men of Israel and of Judah arose and shouted, and pursued the Philistines until thou come to the valley and to the gates of Ekron. And the wounded of the Philistines fell down by the way to Sharaim, even unto Gath and unto Ekron. And the children of Israel returned from chasing after the Philistines, and they spoiled their tents. And David took the head of the Philistine, and brought it to Jerusalem, but he put his armour in his tent. And when Saul saw David go forth against the Philistine, he said unto Abner, the captain of the host, Abner, whose son is this youth? And Abner said, As thy soul liveth, O king, I cannot tell. And the king said, Inquire thou whose son the stripling is. And as David returned from the slaughter of the Philistine, Abner took him and brought him before Saul with the head of the Philistine in his hand. And Saul said to him, Whose son art thou, thou young man? And David answered, I am the son of thy servant Jesse, the Bethlehemite.